The final place that L. Ron Hubbard lived was Creston, California, at a ranch that was confidential until he died on the property in January 1986. James Mortland was in charge of L. Ron Hubbard's household unit for some time. And then after L. Ron Hubbard's death, he actually went to the ranch in Creston, California. We did a live interview with him over 2 years ago, and this is a replay of that interview. We think you'll find it informative. This is another peeling classic. You're going to hear stories about L. Ron Hubbard's final home when he died. James Mortland also was in charge of construction at the Gold Base, building many facilities there, including the music studio and other places. He hasn't been interviewed before, so we think you're going to enjoy this one. Again, it's a peeling classic. If you've seen it before, you can skip it if you like, but if not, we think you might find it informative and enjoy it. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our channel, our Scientology Stories, Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher, and I'm going to introduce to you my co-host, Janice Gillum Grady. Hi, Janice. How you doing today?
Aloha, Mark. Good day, everybody.
Aloha, Janice.
What?
I said aloha to you, too.
Okay. Yep. We're going to have an exciting interview today.
Yeah.
But I will let Mark do his thing first.
Yeah. Before we start, everybody get in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from. Okay. And so we can get a bunch of people in here. We've got a great guest that we're going to be interviewing and lots of great photos and things you've never seen before. I see, hey, John Sosowski is in from northeastern Pennsylvania. John, we gave the Gumbies to our dogs, right, Janice? Didn't you give your Gumbies last night to your dogs?
Yes, and I videoed it for you. I'll put it on Facebook later. But I found myself, if I walked barefooted around the house, I kept stepping on little green pieces.
Oh, they actually chewed through it. My dog hasn't chewed through it yet. Anyway, John, thanks very much for that. We got Stone Mountain, Georgia in the house, New York City, Denmark, Scotland.
We have
Germany.
Matt and Amy in the house.
Oh, do we?
Yes,
I saw
we
Matt.
do.
I saw Matt. And
and he said he and Amy are watching.
Oh, fabulous. Hi, Matt and Amy. And I'm sure Jim, our guest, is going to want to say hello as well. Who else is in here? East Texas. Mofo and Koala Calm are here. Wisconsin, Denmark. I think I already said that. Northern California, Norway, right? Wow. Mojave City, Oklahoma, Africa, South Africa again. Okay. Sweden, Alberta, Canada, Spokane, Washington. Boy, we've got a lot of people in here. This is really great. Anyway, without further ado, Janice, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our special guest for the day. Okay. Yep. This is a person that I knew at the Gold Base, and he was integral in a lot of the things that I worked on when I worked for David Miscavige, and he oversaw the construction of a lot of the major buildings at the Gold Base in Gilman Hot Springs, and then eventually I sent him up along with a bunch of other people after L. Ron Hubbard died up to Creston to take care of the ranch up there and work for Pat and Annie Broeker. But I haven't talked to our guests just until about 10 minutes ago, since we've been out, and so it's real pleasure for me to introduce to everybody James Mortland, and we call him Jim. Jim Mortland, how you doing, Jim?
Great. How are you guys? You look good.
Really good. Thanks for coming on the show with us, Jim.
Sure. Are you actually in Hawaii, Mark?
No, I'm not. I'm in Las Vegas along with Janice. Hawaiian shirts has been my thing for a long time. So, I try and wear a different Hawaiian shirt each time. But anyway.
He's now on his second round of wearing Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah, I've got like 35 or 40 of them. So I just sort of rotate through one after the other.
Good for you.
Anyway, hey, Tori Christman's in the house. Hi, Tori. We just want to say hi to you. And Goldie is in, and she's moderating. Clearwater Chad's in the house. We want to say hi to Clearwater Chad. Anyway, Jim, let's get started. You know, one thing I don't know about you is I don't even know how you got. I know you're from Michigan, and Michigan State's a big, thing for you. But how did you get into Scientology? I don't even know. And how did you get at the gold base? Maybe there you go. Go Spartans. But can you tell me briefly how you got in Scientology and how you ended up at the gold base?
Well, I was going to college. Spent 3 years. I was a pre-law. It was a criminal justice school. Michigan State and Cornell had the top two schools for that subject at the time. I thought maybe, I wanted to do that. I grew up pretty naive. I was thinking I could be like a Perry Mason or, one of those kind of guys. But anyway, when I learned about the law, after 3 years, I was pretty confused. I studied a lot of history, psychology, religion for my last 3 years, kind of wasting my college the last year, but I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. So I left before my senior year, and I traveled from Michigan to San Diego, stayed with my sister. Then I hitchhiked up to first Seattle, where a guy approached me on the street, body router. He said, "Have you heard of Dianetics?" And I said, "No." And he didn't. That was it. I just kept going. And 4 days later, I went back to Portland, Oregon. And oddly, another guy said, "Hey, have you heard of Dianetics?" And this time I could say, yes. The guy just mentioned the word to me. So anyway, long story short, somebody just explained the basic point about the reactive mind, I, and the analytical mind and that relationship. And I liked that kind of in a split second, codified a lot of stuff I've been studying and couldn't probably articulate very well. So I was interested in it. And I started reading the book. I didn't do an OCA, or they probably would never have let me in. No, that was what got me interested. So then I did the comm course, and I did NED in Portland. Same time, Eric Newsom was there just starting. And so, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know you guys were close.
Oh, yeah.
Eric Newsom?
Yeah, before he became my junior in the States for years.
Jim, we've got a lot of audience that have never been in Scientology, so we have to be careful on the terms we're using, like the OCA test and NED. Those are things they won't know. Okay, so sorry.
Well, we'll explain for them. Anyway, you don't worry. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. So anyway, I did those. I liked the courses a lot. And then I was recruited to join the Sea Org. And it was in December of 79 in Oregon. And I was working, doing roofing up there for a while. That's my first sort of construction job. Anyway, in March, I went to the New World Corps. I don't know if they know what the New World Corps was, but it was sort of a special unit that was created with some, at that point, technology that was developed to improve auditor training, the quality of that, and also for staff, which got me really interested. Its intent, and I've read all the advices in HCOBs, and it was fascinating, was designed to make the staff members more competent and more able to operate as a team without all the aberration that a group can get into. Anyway, that was the plan. But anyway, so from there, I was there until 82 when I went, quote unquote, over the rainbow or whatever. I went to the base. It was the time it was called the Summer Base S. Yeah. And that it was gold. Gold wasn't really known at the time when I started in 1980. And I was up there as the senior CSN, the senior case supervisor international, Ray Midoff, who was brand new. The prior one was still there running around a pole with some of his
David
staff.
Mayo.
Yep.
David Mayo, yeah.
So I was his org officer. I started off as that, and I was there. I was doing that for about 2 years, got in trouble. And then Vicky Asnaran put me into the HU at that point.
The household unit for L. Ron Hubbard, right? Because he still was alive.
Correct. And I organized all his libraries, of which there was 5, put in the Dewey Decimal System and all that kind of thing. And I took care of all the gifts he would get and organized them. And some of them would be sent to him. And I would see his little handwritten note come back about where he wanted certain things. Like he had what do you call those steers in Texas, Longhorns. Yeah. He wanted it put on some car. I had to turn that over to JB or the car guys at the time. David Lance.
Where was the CO? Who was the CO? The commanding officer for the household unit? Was it Walter yet or no?
No, Walter replaced me after I went to Creston.
Walter Kotrick, we're talking about. Anyway,
correct. Yeah, it's a good question. I kind of go blank. Who was the CO? Because I generally dealt with Janet Adair, who was the deputy senior messenger for the household unit.
Right.
And there was a period of time we actually didn't. Oh, I know. John Paulson. Do you remember John Paulson?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, I remember him. Yeah.
Sorry, he was there, and then I replaced him later. I don't know. Everybody got in trouble here and there, you know.
Yeah.
So in '85, right after, in fact, Janice then became the deputy senior messenger over the HU.
That's right.
And I had gotten my first illness. I hadn't been sick for literally 14 years, and I was sick as a dog. And that weekend, I found out was the weekend he departed, and we had this big event in LA the following month, Tuesday or something like that. And you know, we didn't know what it was about at the time. And that's when I first meet Pat Broeker. And just so you know, the whole time we were working in the HU, Pat Broeker was never around. Sometimes you'd see his initials, PB.
Yeah.
But generally, it was Annie. She would be the only one that would write to us about whatever, needing things. So anyway, that was my first time seeing him. And then I guess seeing her. I think, if I recall, she was on the stage, was she not? Or no?
Yes. She, not that one. She was at the March 13th event.
Yeah, you're right. And I was at the ranch at that one. I remember when she was sent, that was like her big reintroduction, I guess. You're right. That was when I was up there. So that I went up there in February. Within about 4 weeks of his passing, I was sent to Creston with everybody else. One of the things that's interesting to me, in hindsight, and even at the time, I didn't understand it, created a major confusion on day one of arriving there, was we spent 2 days full time, myself, Phil Sherlock, all the guys coming from base to go up there. And I was supposed to be the CO of the
commanding officer.
Yeah, sorry, commanding officer in charge up there. But in those 2 days, we were under Norman, who was the executor of the will.
Norman Starkey, yeah.
And Dave. I'm assuming everybody here knows who Dave is.
Right.
David Miscavige.
Did I just say Dave or DM or just
Dave is fine.
Doesn't matter. They're you know,
there's other names,
everybody
words
calls
I
it
could
different
say,
things, yeah.
but I don't want to say something not.
No, don't worry about it.
Or whatever. So we spent 2 days there, and the whole point of what they were briefing us on, and me in particular, because I had Phil Sherlock under me, who was in charge of the finances for the ranch, and he had to deal with David Lance, who was, of course, the former, household unit transport in charge. So they were the two guys that had to keep track of all the money, because there was this intermediate point where the will was supposed to be under, have to go through whatever challenges, and then it would become part of CST, which is Church of Spiritual Technology. They know that, right?
Right.
That's correct.
Which was the thing set up for all of, his recordings, books, everything.
Yeah.
Anyway, so 2 days were spent there. They just go hammering not to spend things and do all this stuff, and that. Excuse me.
It's okay.
Norman was supposed to be my boss. Okay, the day we go there, we go up with Dave and Norman, all of us, Herb, Mats, Gelda, all these guys. That day, I'm introduced to Annie, and then that whole day, everybody's up there. We have a nice meal. I get taken around the place. I see Pat Broeker on a backhoe just digging some hole somewhere. To this day, I don't know what he was doing. But that was an interesting thing, because the first thing, and again, if you want me to stop talk and say or pause or whatever. But
well, I was going to say, we're going to go through some slides, which will actually help to illustrate some of the stuff. But no, I appreciate everything you're saying. I mean, you're refreshing my memory on a lot of things too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's an important thing that happened that day.
Yeah. Well, let me go ahead and put up some slides here, okay, so we can walk people through it, okay, and then you can comment. Okay. This is we're going to talk about the Gold Base and also the Creston Ranch with Jim, and this is a photograph of Jim, of course. And go ahead, Janice. This is when you go ahead and describe what this is here for you.
Yeah,
Jim.
This is March of this year in Virginia, where Cheryl, who's in the front right, and myself, the back right, we visited Ronnie Miscavige, Dave's older brother. He's in between Cheryl and I. And on the other side of the table, there's Jim smiling away there, and his lovely wife, Sarah. We had a great time, huh, Jim?
Yeah. Hope you like that restaurant. It's a good one.
Yeah, it was. It was very good.
And you're in the Williamsburg area of Virginia?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm from Northern Virginia, so that's why I was doing that. How did you all end up down in Virginia by chance? Just as a quick aside.
Yeah, well, I can jump forward on my timeline here.
Yeah.
When we came, again, when we were sent out, I was told it was from Dave or RTC, sent Sarah with me, which was a shock. And she didn't know that. None of us knew it. Literally, before we're leaving, I'm sent to the old BPI building. You guys remember that Bridge Publications building at the PAC?
Yeah.
And I've been in the RPF for when I left the, well, we've jumped way ahead. But anyway, when I come down, and I didn't seen her for a month because and she hadn't seen me. So long and short of it was, we're to leave literally that the next 30 minutes. I had gone to rent a car with somebody who was trustworthy, the former IFD. Forget her name. They can see her face so clearly, but she was German.
International Finance Director, IFD.
Oh, yeah, had nice dark black hair. So anyway, that's how we got there. I drove to my dad, he's a retired professor, and he was living in Green Valley, which is just south of Tucson.
Right, in Arizona.
Yes, sorry. So we
and
went
this
there.
This is when you basically left the Sea Org, right? Or were you kicked out?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll
so I go there.
We'll go over that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we go there. My dad, who's this person? Because the last person he knew was Amy. But Amy and I hadn't seen each other, and I could be a little incorrect, but I believe it's at least a year. She was sent to Flag, and I was persona non grata to the nth degree at that point. I mean, I've been persona non grata up and down for pretty much my whole career.
And you'd been in the Sea Org how long when they kicked you out?
19 years.
19 years. Wow.
Yeah. So, so when I get there, I got a call from my dad, who says Amy had called him. And I was like, great, because I have no idea how to contact her or anything. I just knew she was in the Flag RPF. That's kind of all I knew. And I called her, or she called me, and I was on a phone, and she was explaining to me about her and Matt, and it was great. I mean, I was just glad she was doing well, and the fact she could talk, we could communicate at all was amazing. Yeah. I mean, I had known Matt. Matt was literally the third person that met me all the way back when I first arrived at the base in '82. First person was Jeray Rathbone when I got out in the middle of the night. I didn't know her at all, but she welcomed me. And the next morning, the first guy that I meet is Dave. I'm in there at breakfast, and he comes in, this guy with all the gold, somebody shorter than me, which I thought was a shock. But he was very nice then, but I didn't know who he was. So I think it was Matt who was in charge of security. I think
Matt's like 6'3".
Matt right away because he's security. He said, "Oh, that's David Miscavige." And I go, "Okay." I'd known about some of the earlier, I knew Janet Adair, and I knew about, Gail, and some of those. Yeah. So anyway, so that's that part. In terms of Amy and I, when we're talking on the phone, that was where she was going to, I think I gave her the address, or I got her address, and I forget who sent what to whom, but we then finally were able to end the thing. And then a week later, I married, Sarah.
Yeah.
And you and Sarah have been married how long now?
17 years.
17 years.
Oh my gosh, she's going to kill me if I got this wrong. 19 years.
And that's Sarah and Jim, and looks like you've got a dog. I don't know the dog's name.
Well, that's Joseph, and he's passed away now. Now we've got two other dogs, a big black lab called Shadow, and then a little Australian, mix. It's a shepherd and Australian cattle dog named Kaya, who's a maniac. But I love them both. So.
And then Janice explained, Sarah is related. She's Sarah Blythe, right? That's her maiden name.
Correct.
Yeah, she's Biddy Miscavige's younger sister, or one of them.
Right, which is why we thought I was set with her or something, because they didn't want to just send, this is, I think we actually got this later from talking with Ronnie and Biddy, which is another part that'll come up, how I got to Williamsburg via Arizona.
Okay.
Is when we, out of the blue, Biddy calls us when, in that same first couple of weeks we're in Arizona. And we go, apparently Biddy and Ronnie had they were able to talk to the International Director of Inspections and Reports at Flag because of who they were, their family, right? And they found out where we were. Yeah. So it was a totally unsanctioned call, but it was great. We called and talked to them, and she explained, because I was looking for work, because mostly what I had done was construction. So that was where I kind of created a resume out of my 20 years of designing and building stuff, So I don't know if I've missed a beat somewhere, but that's kind of.
Oh, no, that's good. I just wanted to introduce you, Sarah. I knew she was related to Biddy and all that. And
that's
then,
when
of course,
she was living here in Williamsburg with Ronnie. So at that point in their life, Sarah, they really, again, they've been separated, really not able to have, any kind of quote normal sibling life. So we decided to go there. And I had lined up several jobs, actually, at construction people all the way up to Alexandria and even down to Virginia Beach, and I got offered 2 of them, and I took the one that was here in Williamsburg for logistical reasons.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I was going to show. So these are the photos. Like for everybody who doesn't know, the Amy he's talking about is Amy Scobie, and Jim and Amy. This is she sent us these photographs. This is your wedding day on the right, and this is a picture from there. How long were you guys married?
17 years.
17 years, yeah.
17 or 18.
Yeah, and that's you back then. I don't remember this wedding. I saw pictures of it. Here's the wedding party. Janice, you're over there on the right, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm the second from the right, holding on to Roanne in front of me, Roanne Horwich.
Yeah, you know what? And that's Mike Eldridge right next to me.
Oh, okay.
Oh, to the left.
That's Matt's Markowitz next to Walter Kotrick. Again, we were on the self-sufficiency project when we left the ranch under Todd Alexander as the corporate liaison IC at that point.
Right. And that was a project to basically so that the Gold Base could grow its own food and that type of thing, right?
Yeah, there were certain advices that Hubbard had done in 78 and 79. When there was a huge oil issue. There was the creation of OPEC. If you ever wondered about the oil producing countries from Arabia, that began in 78 when we lost, there was lines for gas and all this stuff. Anyway, that kind of began a lot of his earlier research, including looking at solar power. We did all kinds of studies and research and came up with a whole plan to do it. None of it got done for late. I think he was just keeping us busy, to be honest. He didn't know what to do with us.
But so that's Matt Markowitz on the left, then Walter Kotrick, second in from the left. I don't know who the other, Mike Eldridge is the fourth one in, but I don't know who the third one in is.
Well, I think I know who that is. That's the guy that Amy may know. He was a WDC member, Watchdog Committee. I just went blank on his name.
Yeah, he was European, right? I remember this face.
No, he's totally American.
Oh, American. Okay.
But right. I think Amy would recognize him. He was.
And then, go ahead.
No, I think I just went blank on his name. He's very quiet.
Tom Ashworth.
That's it.
Amy
that's Tom Ashworth.
Oh, Ashworth. Cool. That's who it is. I'm good with
I recognize him. Yeah.
Names,
And then,
I can name the ladies.
Yeah, I was going to say, then there's Mike Eldridge, and then you, and then go ahead. There's Amy.
Amy's the bride.
Liz.
And behind her is Janadair, and then there's myself and Roanne.
Hold on, Janadair Swanson.
Janadair Swanson. And then myself with Roanne Horwich. Yep. And then the one on the end is Liz Ingber, who I have been calling out for not communicating with her parents since the 80s.
Yeah.
Because her brother, Andrew Barton, is missing.
Oh, really? I remember Andrew.
Yeah, we haven't been able to find him. And
anyway, so that was
WDC Reserve. That's right. That's what I'm. Yeah. She would remember that.
And we're in touch with Tom. Tom's in the Phoenix area. He's a great guy. I always like Tom. Anyway, so that's that. And then here's a picture that's Matt, Sarah, Amy, and Jim.
Yeah, and
when was that taken?
Boy, this is where you put me on the spot. Probably about almost 10 years ago, maybe 8 to 10. Okay. That's here in Williamsburg. That's actually Yorktown. That's the place where we won our independence, the famous York battle. That's Yorktown right behind it. And the York River, you kind of see a sliver of it there over our shoulder.
Yeah, we went. You took Cheryl and I there.
Yeah, we have a whole routine we take. There's a lot to see, but there's certain things I'm a big history buff, and
yeah, Jim, I'm the same way, and that's one of the great things about Virginia. I grew up in Virginia. Is history is all around you. You go a town over, and then some Civil War battle happened there or something. You know what I mean? It's pretty amazing.
Yep.
Okay, great. Anyway, so that's that, and then we're going to go over being at the Gold Base. Like I remember working with you on, like you were involved in the LRH Music Studio, right? With
Correct.
Steve Willett and Andre Tabayoyan, right?
Correct. They did there's two major renovations of it. Then the second one I was in when literally everything was gutted and we redid everything, bringing it up to the.
I think I have photos of the inside of that in a second, but just so everybody knows, before L. Ron Hubbard died, he was in hiding and nobody knew where he was. And in 1982, 83, it was like, get the base ready for his return because we're going to get the all clear and clear all the legal lawsuits because he wants to come back to the base, right? And one of the main things he wanted to do was record music. So a music studio, which you see here in this photograph, was a state of the art for that time period. It was a state of the art studio. It was built from the ground up using almost all Sea Org members. I mean, I think there was some contractors that had to raise beams and things like that. But I mean, everything was done. And Steve Willett, I think, was in charge along with Andre. And then, of course, you were involved, I think, at some point, at least doing work. And then this is the inside of the studio. Is this what you're talking about when it was redone?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of things that were redone, but there's also a lot of electrical. Everything was changed to fiber optic being run through there. New design, and you can see if you look at had a brand new mix board. It was even a bigger one. There was just a lot.
Oh, bigger than the Massenburg board?
Yeah, the Massenburg was. Excuse me, that was the same. But do you remember Gary Luigi?
Yeah, Luigi. Yeah,
he had come up along with Steve Marlowe, who was the LRH's audiovisual in charge, a new better acoustic thing, and that's the drum room you see in the right there through that picture. That's where the drums were. There's also a vocal place. You can't see it in this photo, but all the acoustic, we had to strip everything down and a different layering of different densities of material. The whole thing was redone that way.
Yeah, and the whole design was that the musicians in the actual studio portion, they'd be looking towards the control room window. So basically, the idea was that it would be like a stage, like you see stage lights up there, and that the musicians would be playing towards the control booth, which would be the audience, right? And then this is inside the control room here, looking through the window on the left, and then you see theater seating in the back, and then along the wall you see these people that are on there. Now that's been redone. You can see the mix board there in the center. That looks like the Massenburg mix board.
Yeah,
but they did embroidery of people as part of the renovations on the original one. I think you remember this, Jim. Yeah. And Janice, I was on there with my wife, Julie, and David and Shelley, and they had different executives' faces in those, like on the wall in the back. And I'm not surprised they had to redo it because we were on there.
So remove all the embroidered SPs.
Yeah. But that's the inside of the control room, and it definitely does look different. So you were involved with that too?
Yeah, to the second part of it, there was also a whole new sound system, new speakers, and that even looks like it's been changed again. This looks like a third iteration because the speakers we did with those tall, it's called the Professional Monitor Company out of England, huge towers. That was the second version. This looks like a third one. I mean, the speakers part that kept always being worked on.
Yeah. And then this was another project. This is a Massacre Canyon. Well, this was the lodges, but this is Massacre Canyon Inn or the Gilman Hot Springs. This is an old picture from before we ever bought the property. When they had the golf course, you can see a golfer there on the right. But that was the lodges down there. And then were you involved with this is Massacre Canyon Inn. This is where we ate our meals. This is where the dining room was and all that. But then we actually you guys did a major renovation on it. You were involved with that, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that was all part of what we, it was originally called the 2-year plan, which went for another 5 or 6. But we actually expanded it. Everything was gutted, new kitchen. We had some structural because it's really close to a fault line. There's a lot of things like that done. But
yeah, this is an aerial shot of that the Massacre Canyon, the dining room. We called it MCI, but it's much bigger than it was originally, right? And then I would just remember, Jim, I don't know how long it took to do the renovations, but we ate in a tent out in the back, and then there was a trailer that was brought, a food trailer to cook the food. Do you remember that, Janice?
Yeah.
I remember that definitely. Yep.
Yeah,
Standing in line in the tent.
Yeah, I had to
On a
set
windy-
that up. I was the complaint box for everything, and I understood this. We had to figure all this out through each. We were doing sometimes 3, 4, 5 projects at a time, and trying to figure out the logistics so everything kept going. And that was regardless of anything else, just the subject of construction and logistics.
Yeah,
was really, in the end, really good. I mean, I learned a lot. Just kind of a cauldron of fire. I averaged 4 hours of sleep for a long period of time. But
yeah, and it was made into a state-of-the-art kitchen. I mean, it had all the great, the latest stuff and for cooking and baking and all. And then, it got redesigned. But yeah, I remember eating those tents, and everybody was like, if it was a windy, dusty day, it was, got a lot of dirt in there.
yeah,
Yeah, or you're standing in mud in line because of the rains.
yeah, it was not fun.
No.
Yeah. Okay, and then this is Building 36, which is the manufacturing building, and you were involved with overseeing that too, weren't you?
Yeah, and designing it, hiring an architect and an engineer, and doing all that from the ground up. That was an interesting one.
Yeah,
I also had the offices for Gold.
Yeah. I was going to say I had all the executive offices for Gold, the Hubbard Communications office, the security office. It's where all the tape manufacturing was done. The e-meters were moved in there. Everything was in there. It's a big building, but that was built from the ground up.
Isn't that the building Wendell Reynolds stayed in during the big flood?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this first, Jim. Now, that building there, I mean, wasn't it built majority with RPF and Sea Org labor? I mean, we weren't hiring contractors to do that stuff, right?
No, in certain parts we had to. For example,
Right.
the structural steel and the concrete, the slab and the floors, and most of the exterior perimeter framing, and then a lot of the interior was electrical. We did all the electrical, the AC. We did the AC. We did some of those systems that you wouldn't generally know we did. Of course, Martin Reed was my right-hand guy. He was in charge of electrical. Brilliant guy, truly.
Yes.
He was self-taught electrician, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And he literally could design the whole system for the whole base. Unbelievable.
There was an early electrical engineer that we had hired really early on. And he just was a sponge. Martin was, that just learned everything. And by the end, as we go through about 7, 8 or more buildings, he would draw it up and the engineer would just review it and stamp it. So that was really impressive.
Now, I was going to tell a couple stories about this building. Before this building was built, do you remember when the basketball court was built down there by Building 36? Do you remember the outdoor basketball court? The first one, not the one over by the G units, right?
Yeah.
I remember Steve Willett.
Yeah.
Well, Steve Willett, he liked to play basketball, and I did too. And I think you guys had some leftovers concrete from a pour somewhere. So you poured a full court basketball court.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic, Janice. We played basketball when we had exercise time, we would play full court basketball for like 25, 30 minutes, sometimes all the way into lunch. And we had to get back, shower, and at muster by 12:30 or 12:45. But I love that, man. We played all the time until Miscavige got to the base, and then it was like no exercise time.
Well, that basketball court, I used to play with you guys, and Mike Sutter hated that I was a girl and people were passing me the ball, but you always threw it to me. But I was huffing and puffing, running up and down the court, and that's when I decided I have to stop smoking. And so Amy and I and Janet there all went into agreement. Okay, the three of us are going to stop smoking together. And then I would catch Amy or Janet there in the bathroom smoking. But I put on weight, but I did stop.
Well, then the other story, Jim, about that basketball court was that Sea Org day after the basketball court was built. ASI, Author Services, came up with David Miscavige, and they had a team, and Gold had a team, and it got into a fist fight because Miscavige was goading his ASI guy. I think it was Dave Bloomberg. He elbowed Gary Weesey in the mouth and knocked his teeth out, and it was crazy.
But it was the HU.
Was it?
Yeah, it was ASI versus HU, and I had the guys. Remember, we had there's a unit called PURL, PURL, Pack Unit Run Logistics. We had a player named Gary Madras.
I remember Gary. Yeah,
Gary. Whew. And we had Huff, who was, what was this? Fred Hauk. Sorry.
Fred Hauk. Yeah, absolutely. He was real good.
Yeah, he was a great guard. We were beating them, and I was guarding Dave. Dave was doing me, and he kept doing his elbow thing. But my hockey and football, I wouldn't take that crap. But it all broke down because it actually fouled Gary Madras a hard foul, and it broke his leg.
Oh yeah,
and that was it. Everybody just went crazy, and I had Andre on my team. Yeah.
Yes, and Andre was the coach of Janice's team when she was on the ship in the Sea Org. I had no idea.
Yeah, it was very telling about him, just that whole game.
Well, and that whole Sea Org day was very telling because up at the ship, up at the swimming pool, that was when Miscavige told a bunch of ASI guys to grab Janice's sister, Terry, and throw her in the pool. And Terry refused to go, and she went all the way to her birthing room. And then Miscavige sent them to go through the window, get her, and drag her out.
It took 16 guys to drag her out of her room and dump her in the pool. And Dave's kind of proudly, "See, I got you." And she's like, "You're proud that it took 16 people to put me in the pool?"
Yeah, no, this was before he took over. This is before he became the COBRTC. Right. But this was proof that he was a terrible sport. I mean, literally, he was somebody you did not want to play because he would bend the rules, and I mean, he was terrible. Anyway,
absolutely, he was. And he couldn't play for crap, to be honest with you.
No, he couldn't. But he had Marty. Marty Rathbun was a good player. He had some other guys at ASI that were pretty good. But anyway, so it was Greg Wilhare.
Boynton was a good player.
Yeah. But anyway, we used to play, and I loved it. I got in the best shape of my life playing in, and we was in the heat, and we didn't care. We just had a good time. But anyway, that was that, and that got torn down when the Building 36 was being brought up, because that also was where Tom Cruise would land his helicopter when he flew to the base later, right before we left in 1990. That was his sort of heliport. Anyway, enough about Building 36. Okay, now this is an aerial shot. The last building that you guys were working on when I left was the Estates building, which is up at the top right. That was the huge garage, and it was being renovated. And that's where Miscavige attacked me in the garage.
Well, I remember that.
Yeah.
Were you there, Jim?
I remember seeing it. I came around the back, and I see Mark. And there's somebody, and I couldn't really, at the first, as I'm coming around the back, like this side, you can see in the photo, the right side. He's right in that big entrance there. And Dave's just punching him in the chest. And Mark's just maintaining and just looking at him. And I see, you have to look at my perspective. Okay, corporate liaison in charge, he's a big deal. And
that's me. That was me. Yeah.
But it was the physical nature of it. I was like, holy crap. Mark, he could just go boink, and then Dave would have been flying, but he maintained civility.
What I did was I actually went down on the ground, covered up, because I didn't fight back because I actually wanted everybody to see how crazy he was, And then I stood up when he stopped, and I reached behind my head, and it was bleeding, and I said, "You made my head bleed," And then he said, like, "Oh, I'll send down the medical officer. It was for your own good," and he sort of scurried off. But people always go, "Why didn't you fight back?" Well, number one, I wanted people to see he was crazy. But number two was he always had 4 or 5 people with him. So what are you going to do? You're going to beat, you're going to fight back and then have them all, grab you. And it just didn't make any sense. But anyway, that was the garage building that was all being worked on and all that. And that's also around the time of the flood, which, we don't have to go into the details on that. But that's when that's when you and Paul left, right?
Yes. Yeah, we left. I think it was Sea Org Day next week. We'll be 33 years out.
Yeah. That was a contentious time, wasn't it, Jim?
Well, this is the thing, and I think I mentioned it to you, Janice, or someone. But when we did what was called the 2-year plan, one of the first projects that was supposed to get done was this channel that was at the top on the north side, because this area of California is highly erosive. You get a lot of wind and rain, and you don't get a lot of rain, but at a certain time of year, you can get gully washers. Just a ton of rain, particularly in January. Anyway. The point was we did a reservoir. We built that, and next to the reservoir to protect it was supposed to be this channel, just like a series of steps. It's gabion, which is simply the Italian word for those rock, right? And they're held in these wire baskets. And he never would fund it. I even went to John Epstein, who was in charge of finances. This is like, it makes no sense. We're going to start putting all this, building these buildings when you're not doing the things that are necessary to protect them. Right. So the one thing we were allowed to do was the bottom of it, which was a huge desiltation basin, huge collection place with special grates so that the water, like in other words, the mud and rock were supposed to get stopped and it would go across. Okay. So when that happened, it was called by our engineer, Webb and Associates was the name of the engineer, 1,000-year rain. It was only 20 minutes. But what they mean is in frequency, it was something they would have expected to occur that infrequently. But for 20 minutes, it just dumped. And we ran out there. And of course, I think Cruz's bag was still there with a bunch of clothes in one of the buildings called the G units, which are at the other end.
Yeah, they were being renovated. They were getting ready for him. Yeah.
Yeah. And they had already had some of his clothes arrived through a bag. But anyway, that kind of ruined all that. Because they came across the road, went through the gate, went into the top 2 buildings. It actually didn't go into the building, went right up to them. Anyway, we were, I was on the south side when the rain started. I was literally way out near the levee where the quote-unquote San Jacinto River is, which is usually dry. And I was calling on my phone to everybody to run up to the G's because security had called and said, hey, we have mud coming across the road there. So, I had Matt to go get his backhoe. We got everybody up we could. And I thought we did pretty good to just quickly, without, trying to be safe at the same time, protect anybody there. However, we got called out. We were all sitting there soaking wet. About 8 hours later at MCI, Runa was looking down at the carpet thinking, this is a brand new carpet I just put in. Now we're just ruining it with mud and rain. But anyway, we were called out for how we, somehow it was our fault, and as the head of the states, it was fundamentally my fault. So I was like, I whatever, I just.
Well, what happened, Jim, was that, it's amazing nobody got killed. I mean, we were waist deep in mud and water. I remember that. I was on the decks then working on the sports fields, but that's when I was standing next to Janice's husband, Paul, in that call out when Miscavige came in. We were all standing at attention in front and he was foaming like a rabid dog. I'd never seen anything like it. And without saying anything to each other, Paul and I both went, this guy's gone crazy. We need to get out of here. And that night or the next day, was it Janice, or that night or the next day, you blew and I blew too. We both blew the same day.
It was the next day because the next day was Sea Org Day and Sea Org Day got canceled and I couldn't get my Sea Org bonus after, I had a bonus of $300-400 coming in, which is big money in those days.
Yeah. But we left the same time. And this was the second time I'd blown because I already knew that Miscavige was going crazy. And then they made a mistake because the next day or 2 days later, Mike Sutter rounded me up at my sister's house in LA. And the first thing he told me was, oh, Janice and Paul Grady left too last night, and that told me, you know what, I'm not crazy because, you think you're crazy, particularly because, Jim, we were in senior positions. I mean, Janice and I both were. And it must have had, because you weren't as close to what was going on, but it must have had an impact when like senior people are like just going, I'm getting the hell out of here.
Yeah. I mean, it was just crazy that particular day and everything about it. Cause again, he was out of sequence and I would tell him that. And I would, and he was just, go to the IFD. And I knew I go to the IFD, of course, Dave's telling the IFD, you got to put money into marketing. So, and Dave's still beating me up, because you're talking about some of these things, but there was the film lab, there was a lot of other projects we had to do. We were working on at the time, the upper lodges, the lower lodge, the middle, and then the villas. We went through, did all those many times. Music studio too. So my point is like, that's where I just realized this guy is a freaking whack job beyond whatever. I'm like, what is he thinking we're supposed to have done? And the only reason we went in there, I had my guys go in, was because I could see it was clearing up. This was literally from a blue sky, bam, and then it was, and we only went until we could see that the water was starting to abate. But it happened so quick. We were actually on there. In fact, I probably stupidly, because it was still raining, because I was relatively close, I just drove up there, and I was seeing the mud coming across the road. And that's when I called and said, no, everybody stay back until we can, figure it out. But I just remember thinking, I mean, that's why engineers exist,
That's exactly right. Yeah, I even remember the grading contractor that you guys were using when they were building the berms around the sports fields before that flood. The guy goes, stuff's going to come right down that mountain and go right into here. You know what I'm saying? I remember he said that.
They thought he knew better than the natural valleys and where the hills were. Instead of augmenting those, he's trying to, like, I don't know. He's trying to, like the Pharaoh, creating a new pyramid in the middle of the Nile. How's that going to work,
Anyway, to go back to the buildings right in the center there, that's the double wides. That became the whole, right, in the future. I don't know, were you around for that? I mean, I know those double wides were supposed to be CMO International Management temporarily. Is that right?
Correct. That's what they originally were for. That was supposed to be the next building we were supposed to make, was the CMO building, which was further up behind. As far as I know, it's never been built yet. That's one of the buildings that's never even been started. But when I left before it became the whole, but I would, because when I was there, it was SEMA and WDC, like Amy worked out of there, all these people, that's where it was. And
what happened to Del Sol?
Del Sol's part of Qual. It became the auditing rooms for Qual.
Got it.
And the course rooms are what you call Qual, the big, with the stained glass window that we did. So they're right next to each other. So they turned that into auditing, which of course just became sec checking.
Right.
Well, this is it right here.
You
What
see,
you're
that's
talking
Del
about.
Sol in the upper left there.
Yeah, the upper left. That was the CMO WDC Exec Strata building when we were there. But then, like you said, you guys, that building with the steeple, that was the old spa from Gilman Hot Springs. That's where we did our study, our student, our course rooms and auditing and all that.
Library in the middle. And then two courses.
Yeah, the building in the center with the steeple, that wasn't there when we were there. That was a patio. It was a U-shaped building, right, Jim? And then you guys built all that. Yeah. And it's a beautiful, beautiful space. And then off to the left, like you said, Del Sol, and that became auditing. Right. And then this is an aerial view.
It was when we did Del Sol and turned it into the HGC, the Hubbard Guidance Center, the auditing part of it.
This is an aerial view of a more recent photo, and the buildings on the right are the berthing buildings for the staff. That's another picture of it, and then this is a close-up of it. And you were involved with that. Now, what I was going to say before you start talking about it was that the pads were made for those in like 1990 when I was still there. They bulldozed the pads and all that, and then all of the staff was moved into Hemet, into apartment complexes, 4 different apartment complexes.
Yep.
But then I was amazed that they lived in Hemet for years. It took years. They never built the berthing buildings, right?
Right.
And they probably spent millions of dollars on rent that they could have gone to just building the buildings, right?
Yeah. If you got answers, as to why, let me know.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
He wanted us. He said, "Start the berthing buildings, get going." Yeah. And he either called finance or whatever, and that's how it got started. So we all thought we were going, we're going to start it, we're going to continue it, and then finish it. Instead, it just sat there with weeds and became, a place for Joe Canine to kill weeds, his new post.
But I don't think a lot of the staff wanted to be berthed on the base because it just cut their freedom even more.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole other aspect of it. I agree.
Do you remember about what time those buildings were built? What year?
Well, when I had left in 2003, the shells were all there, and they were, some of the framing was done. They were, in other words, the perimeter, what you see in the roofs were there. They didn't even have windows yet, most of them, but the building, it was basically there. And we were still trying to figure out, because I think I mentioned he lowered the building by 3 feet to save money, which then became an issue for the air conditioning units, which had been planned to work. There's 3 levels. You can have them connected in 3 of them in line, but I don't know what, again, he had some idea that was going to save a lot of money.
Let me ask you this, Jim, about the money. Okay. Cause did you guys, to build these buildings, you had to get it out of existing income that came in, or because they had millions of dollars in reserves, but you guys couldn't build that. Like right now, I know they buy all these buildings all over the world, and they're obviously using the Sea Org reserves for that. But like that's what delayed these buildings being built, right? You had a hard time getting the money. Is that
it was a week by week FP out of international finance? It was in finance. Yeah. And it was based on flag for the reality. Who's making the money was the flag service org.
Right.
But again, that's also was the same pot that marketing and any other thing was going into. So we had to go week by week, which I always thought was stupid too. I could buy up front. I got an approval, for example, to all the water pipe. Remember, we put in a whole new water system.
Oh, yeah.
That I had figured out. And I found the pipe in Utah, and it had like 17 trucks because I got a great price, but that was 1 week, and then 2 to 3 weeks later when it finally arrived, then I'm trying to get okay to start installing it. You know what I mean? And we actually did most of that ourselves. Guys. So,
but my point being, when I finally saw that they built these buildings, like you said, you left in 2003 or whatever, that was 13 years after initially those pads were built. So they were renting entire apartment complexes for 13 years. And that money could have been used. If they had just output some of the money to build the buildings, they would have saved tons of money. But yet, oh no, we're going to bit and piece it. It's crazy.
Or why even build them at all? Like you were saying, why not just live in town and save the money?
Yeah.
But that opens up a clue to his whole insanity. I don't know. It's just...
No, you're right. You're right. And then, like you said, even now, from what we've heard from people that have left recently, most of these buildings, they've got them down to like the staff living in like 1 or maybe 2 of the buildings. The other ones are empty, and they're basically, right now, they're white elephants. They can't do anything with them. It's just crazy.
Yeah. See, I don't know what they're doing currently. I heard that they're just farming everything out and hiring people, right?
I guess I don't even know what to do there anymore. Anyway, then the next building, this is the movie studio, the Cine Studio Castle, which is humongous. When I saw it the first time I drove by after I left, years later, it's huge. And did you have a hand in that too?
Yeah, I did the whole planning for it, the architectural designing of what, basically the space planning on what goes where. Barry, of course, did the design at the time, how it looks and what, how to make it look like a castle. But we figured all that out, including, the various cine parts of it. Like they wanted direct lighting, not AC current, DC. So because they like to take set sound and they don't want to hear the crackle or distortion of sound. And how to do that with including, we eventually chose that site because we found out that the place where it was originally supposed to go, which was directly south of Building 36, had a major seismic issue,
Right.
Because during this whole time, we hired some really brilliant engineers to investigate the site because you got hills on one side, then you got this flat area, and we knew it was all the result of a lot of debris, sand, eons of time and washing in there. In fact, doing one of the new wells, we ran into a redwood tree, believe it or not, 350 feet down.
Wow.
And drilling, they ran into a redwood tree at 350 feet. And basically those hills, it keeps going in that steep slope. So everything's built up. This is where you get you get like quicksand. If you get like even minor seismic events, the water gets forced up and it's become very unstable. So anyway, long and short of it was we moved it over there because we found by studying that area, we're still close enough to the bedrock of the hill on the other side of the highway to get support for it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, let me ask you, at this point, building the studio, I doubt you built that with Sea Org labor, right? Was that mainly contractors that you guys contracted?
Just again, the shell was for the most part. In other
Oh,
words,
you mean like all like the roofing and the stuff, the siding and all that was
well,
all
it's
done
part
by
of the
Sea Org members?
shell. In other words, the base, the concrete, the footings, the slab, the wall, the perimeter walls, right? The roof, and then a lot of the other non-structural, the interior partition walls, painting, and a lot of that. And that's when Willett was in charge, because that's when I was sent. Right after we were getting started, I went to the command teams. You remember the new era of management?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah, big stuff. Now, you weren't involved in this. The building up there in the front is the RTC, the Religious Technology Center building. That's David Miscavige's building. It's empty, pretty much. And then up in the upper right, that's the new Bonneview mega mansion that Miscavige spent millions of dollars building. Here's a closer look at it here. Yeah. But that's where the old Bonneview used to be, which was just basically a one-story, 3-bedroom house, right, Jim?
Very nice. And it was never part of his plan to have it just removed, destroyed, and bulldozed. He was talking, I don't know if you guys have talked about Barry Stein before, but he had sort of a dual hat as a musician as well as an architect, a totally trained architect. Hubbard had sent him a whole thing about creating, it was supposed to be a museum, and not here, not where this house was, because he used to stay there when he worked at the studio.
Right.
For the days, he would stay in the old house. And I was in the RPF in one of my stints. And when I came out, that's when I thought I'd heard they were building it, and then they got rid of the old what they call BV, Bonneview.
Right.
And Hubbard was totally happy with the old Bonneview.
Totally. It was not part of something he wanted. In fact, anyway, that's just
and then like that old Bonneview. I mean, we talked about this off air, but I remember in 1982, 83 or whenever it was, when we were getting the space ready for L. Ron Hubbard to come back, they found mold and mildew in the walls. And so the handling was lift the whole house on stilts, put down a new foundation and vapor barrier, get rid of the mold and mildew, then lower the house back down. I mean, it was tremendous work.
And it worked.
You guys pulled it off. Yeah, and it worked. It worked.
Yeah,
so
I don't know
when you go to that trouble, I don't know why you would then bulldoze the house years later. That
he's altering it. As far as I can tell, that one thing, he's altering it. He took that to mean, even though he says don't, it was a different location. He was talking about up on the hill.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you a quick question about Bonneview. Remember the Japanese garden that was behind the old Bonneview? Is it still there, or did they get rid of it?
That I don't know, because when I came back, I was still a ne'er-do-well working in estates, and I never got behind there. I was just, the only time I got up to the new RTC building was to be called out by Dave about something.
Yeah.
So I never got it. I wasn't really running around the base like I used to,
No, listen, just so our viewers know, Jim was an MVP on that property in regards to building things. Steve Willett also, had a lot to do with that too. But you guys took a lot of crap from Miscavige unduly. You know what I mean? It's just crazy stuff. I heard some crazy story from Mark Headley that, when Miscavige, he didn't like all the road noise going by, and that basically you guys had to stand outside every morning because it was waking him up. Is that true?
True. Because you guys designed this road, which is, by the way, it's part of California Highway 79. Yeah. He saw the plan, and it is what it is. It's just engineered. It had to have certain radiuses. Now, and I don't know why that wasn't a problem earlier. Suddenly it was a problem. As I recall, there's a little bit of dropped out time, which makes sense. And I do. Me and Willett, every morning, we had to get up early. We had to come in like 4 a.m. and stand out there for like 3 hours. And we still had to work a regular day. So we were getting about 4 to 5 hours sleep at that time too.
That was his punishment to you guys because you hadn't come up with a solution to the noise. Is that right?
Yeah, he blamed us, not California State. It's part of Caltrans.
What part of the property was this?
The villas. Yeah, you know how the backside of the villas, Janice, they were up the hill. There were grape orchards there, but then the road was there. And DM lived on that side. Right. But because they couldn't close the road and all the trucks, there wasn't something happening. Oh, the buses to the Indian reservation casinos or something was waking him up. And so he was so pissed off about you guys not moving the road or having a solution that he made them stand outside.
I gave him a solution. I gave him a design for some walls that could have been stone veneered, and they would have a certain angle, and it would have knocked out 80% of it, and they wouldn't have even been costly to make. We could have done it on all hands on a couple Saturdays. But he said, oh, that's going to look horrible. So then, so he would present you a problem that was not solvable.
Right.
The catch-22. Catch-22, absolutely.
You get used to it. Well, okay, this is going to be typical, same old, same old. You know, I mean, Willard and I would just go and get coffee early in the morning, and we'd sit out there for 2 hours and talk sports. So, whatever.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, we'll go on to the next thing here. The next part of your story we want to tell is that L. Ron Hubbard's final home in Creston, California. L. Ron Hubbard died in January 1986. Nobody knew where he was until he died, except for a handful of people. And Pat and Annie Broeker were up there, as well as a few other people. And then when Hubbard died in 86, all of a sudden, Pat and Annie were basically assumed to be in charge. And Pat decided that they were going to continue to keep that property and do whatever it is that Hubbard wanted done to that property. And I was assigned the task to send a bunch of people up to the property. And
Thanks,
Jim
Mark.
was one of the, yeah, you're welcome. And I felt really bad when you guys all came back, or not you, but a bunch of them came back and had to go to the RPF. But anyway, yeah, I sent you. I mean, I remember Susie and Jason Bennick, Mike and Penny Eldridge, Bruno Marisi and Julie Marisi. Gelda went up, right? Because Ray was up there. Is that right?
Yeah, Ray was there already. Ray was there with that doctor from
Dr. Denk.
Yes.
Dr. Gene Dank, yeah.
Was there, and Ray was there when I and the other people arrived. Of course, Sarge was there, Steve Fouth, who had been there with Annie. He's kind of the not remembered person, but he was there for all of us.
Yeah,
up there.
exactly.
Anyway,
here.
Sarge is the one who told me about DM and Pat sitting in the van together, rewriting people's reports to Hubbard and taking things out. And, they totally altered things that were going up to Hubbard.
Yeah, it would have been like 82, 83 probably, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that black van that was going between the concepts.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, here's a map. Okay, you can see the INT base over here on the right. Okay, CST headquarters, that's up in the mountains, and that's where it's believed Shelley Miscavige is. And then Big Blue, of course, is in Los Angeles. That's the old Cedars of Hollywood Hospital. And then you see Creston way up there in the left corner. It's near Paso Robles and San Luis Obispo, right? It's between those two towns, and it's in the middle of nowhere, isn't it? Pretty much in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it has a post office. It doesn't even have a store or gas station. At least I should say it did when we were there. It may now. It was just a couple of like literally 4 or 5 houses, no store. I think it might have had a little bar, but it was it was just a little post office. It was nothing.
And then, of course, that's where L. Ron Hubbard was. And then Pat and Annie Broeker were there, and we'll talk about them briefly shortly. And then this is an aerial view of the property. And I'll get in closer, but you can see on the left there, that was like a horse track, right, where they could train horses. Right. And then later, like you said, those symbols in the middle are the Church of Spiritual Technology symbols that Hubbard wanted at all of their locations, so that when he came back in a spaceship and was satellite, orbiting the Earth, he could see the properties and know where to go. And that's what those were for. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead to the next picture to be a little bit closer. That's another area view. Now, these are recent photos. It didn't look like this back when you were there, correct?
Well, it was pretty green. Depends on the time of year. See, like that's in summer. In January.
Yeah, so
February,
it would dry out. It would dry out.
Oh, yeah. A lot of that area now is, instead of cattle ranches, which when we were there is what it was, now it's vineyards. Paso Robles gets a lot of that marine layer, and the hills are great for it. Like you probably can find Paso Robles 1 now. Okay,
and just describe what this building is, because this is the building where L. Ron Hubbard's Bluebird mobile home or whatever bus was parked, and that's where he actually ended up dying. He was living in there, and that's where he died in his bus right here at this location.
Yeah.
What is that building?
That's the stables, and that's where all the horses. Again, Pat, when we were there, had all kinds of horses and was moving them between this place and another. So we took care of the horses there. We also had a chicken coop and a turkey coop, which looks like that's all been removed. We had buffaloes on the hill that this was taken from. If you're up there, that's where they used to have 4 buffalo, and then Pat got 8 more. So we had 12 buffalo up there.
Wow.
I mean, Pat's a whole story in himself. But
why were all those animals there in the first place? Were they just there just to be there?
Annie herself had told me when he was there, he used them for research. Specifically, there was 1 horse he used, and he only had 2 horses there. The other horse was to keep the 1 there. So by the time, literally just a matter of a few weeks, it went from 2 horses to like 18 horses. And Pat was, again, he's like his own, I don't know what he really thought it was bonanza, man. He was just bringing horses and doing the thing, the buffalo, I think he had 4 of them, and he had named the horse, the buffalo, like Hitchcock was one, gave him Western names, but then they brought in 8 more. I don't know what the buffalo were for. She only told me about some research he had done with the horses, but specifically there was only one horse he was really interested in. It was a really nice, gentle mare when I arrived. Yeah, that's the house.
That's the main house, right?
Yeah.
And had a swimming pool.
How far had they been in the renovations when you got there?
It was pretty much done.
So do you know
we
where
ate all our meals? We ate all our meals on the first floor. It's like a bi-level.
Right.
He had a really nice, what wasn't done was the second floor in terms of finishes, right?
Right.
They had a carpenter that Pat got. It was like oak and mahogany and really expensive stuff, and I didn't understand that.
Well, I remember hearing stories just like those white fences. Yeah. I heard stories about how Hubbard would look down the line. If they weren't straight, he would have them take them down and put them back up. Was that true, or things like that? Or
he was already gone by then, but I met the guy. All those guys you heard about in that original thing, like the guy with the camera, already showed how to use it, the guy in charge of the fences, and even the guys that did the fences. I started to run them for a while. Mainly, it was just painting. The way he had it, you had to paint them. So once you finish painting all this fencing, because the whole perimeter's got it too, you then had to restart again. So there's these two.
Because it weathered. It all would weather.
Yeah, it would.
That's crazy.
But I don't know about that because that was, and these 3 things, this was a huge problem to Norman and Dave. These 3 things Pat had us build and set up.
You're talking about
we were all living in trailers originally down here around that. The actual thing that how Hubbard was in at the end was an Avion, those silver ones. He wasn't in the Bluebird then. He was living in there in that little Avion, which was right at the end. You're right. It's right next to where those buildings were. And so this was for us. And they were really nice too,
You're talking about up here at the top.
Yeah, those three were just pulled in double wide trailer homes. We put them together, and then we were allowed to just make them really nice,
So you said David Norman had problems with it because you're spending.
Yeah, because that money was everything we were doing was coming out of the fund, the trust, LH's trust, which was to convey. And what again, David and I was going to mention this one thing earlier. When I said the day that I arrived, everything kind of went into a confusion.
Go ahead.
They would not talk to me after that. Then when they came up, they were totally differential to Annie and Pat. Because I kept trying to pull them aside. Hey, this is what they're telling us to do. Should we be doing this? Because you told me when we started all this, we're part of the estate and we're supposed to be financially responsible to you, to not just be wasting all this money, right?
Yeah.
The day that I arrived, Annie took me aside. You have to realize this is the first time I'm meeting her, who in the household unit we knew as a senior messenger.
Right.
And she said, the first thing she asks me, she's very polite, but she's wearing her sunglasses, and even though it's kind of cloudy out, she says, "What did they tell you your job is?" And they said, and I explained exactly what Norman and Dave told me about the fiscal responsibility, and that I work under Norman, because that was totally crystal clear. Yeah. Okay, the first thing she says is that she just started screaming. Not screaming, she was very angry. She says, "No, that is not your job. That is not what you're to do. I'm your boss," and then she went on a roll about ASI in her mind to how they were dealing with the financial stuff. And the court cases were keeping Hubbard from going back, redoing the films, finishing the ones he didn't get to do. She was just livid. And of course, that is all something I knew nothing about. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
He made it clear that I was not to listen to anything they were saying. So,
yeah, you were caught in the middle. Same thing happened to me. Same thing happened to me as corporate liaison officer working for DM, was because Annie was over RTC, Religious Technology Center,
right.
and Vicky Asnaran answered to Annie and not David. Right. So he would tell me, don't do anything Vicky says. Don't do anything Jesse Prince says. You know what I mean? And you're kind of going like, would happen? Oh, if Pat Broeker comes on the property, don't listen to him. And you probably felt the same way, right? So then when Dave and Norman would come up to the ranch, they just gave you the cold shoulder because they didn't want to say anything to you, right?
And a couple times later, again, they would come up maybe once every 2 months. Norman did, when he saw those, it seemed like that was the first time they'd seen him. We were, those trailers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Norman pulls me aside saying, "What are you doing?" But he takes me so nobody else can hear, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Hey, I'll pull him out of here. You just tell me, you just give me your word, And they said, no, don't do that. Because I could just call them and come, get them out of here. We can save, we don't have to do any of the interiors, save something.
Yeah, and just so our viewers to know,
what?
For our viewers to know, this was the beginning of the power structure to take over Scientology after Hubbard died. Okay, this was the beginnings of it up at the Creston Ranch. Okay,
right.
And they were maneuvering around each other, and people like Jim and the people that I sent up there to work up there, they were pawns in this thing, and they got caught up in it, right?
Oh, everybody. I mean, Susie Bennick, who was the comm center in charge, at that point, she had been earlier than I had, like since 1980, 81, 82.
Yeah.
She was up there. She couldn't figure out what the heck. She had been dealing directly with Annie through the comm stuff, and only Pat peripherally as a courier is how she put it to me. You know what I mean? It wasn't really, he wasn't like the mind, or he wasn't the.
Yeah, that's what I'd heard afterwards too, that Pat, LRH had actually kicked Pat off of Creston and told him not to come back until he had an all clear.
Right.
And so then he was hanging out at whatever in Newberry Springs, right? You guys had
Devore was the other place. There's a little trailer park. That was one of the.
I know Devore. That's where Sinar was for a while.
Correct.
Yeah.
So was JB would kind of go in between those places.
Yeah. And so what was your relationship, or what was your interactions with Pat? Was he in and out, not there, or what was going on then?
Well, he was sort of doing a different version of the musical chairs that Dave was doing at the base.
Uh-huh.
Pat would take people and he'd make you think it was like James Bond or some secret thing. Like he would take, like in the middle of the night, he would show up unannounced, and he'd bring off a couple of horses.
Usually with a gun in his car or truck.
And he was just taking horses to horse shows,
Yeah.
But he always had this trying to create a fiction, like literally I think he did think he was sort of a James Bond type dude. So anyway, my point was I was the only one, I wouldn't go with him. You even say, I said, no, I need to stay because I learned how to take care of all these animals, all these creatures, the swans and everything. I was the only one that knew how to take care of all the horses and everything. Because he kept.
What was your post there? Were you the ranch manager, or what? Were you doing?
I was called the CO, the commanding officer. But it's like I'm just a foreman. That was it,
And then what did the other people do? Like, what did Jason, Susie, Mike, Eldridge? What all did they do?
Well, I started by putting together an organizing chart, I gave everybody a thing. We had Mike, Eldridge, and Gelda. They were going to be qualifications for training and do supervision. Auditing is necessary, and I had this whole thing laid out. And Pat weren't doing that, So your guess is as good as mine. He would take, Sinar over here, and he would send Mike some tech thing, and he would stay up all night with Pat about something. And I tried to keep people doing. It's one that in the end, just by default, I knew every job because sometimes the guy wasn't there that was supposed to do it. So. And that was fine with me. I didn't want to go up, I just thought the guy was a little touched, it's an old term, I think 1800 term, you know what I mean by touched?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a little out.
Something was missing.
Yeah.
Now,
loose.
He could be very nice, don't get me wrong, and he had a good sense of humor, but he could go off on these fanciful things. I didn't know what was real or unreal, and I just kind of put all of it unless I've seen it. It's probably not true,
Right. I have a question. When after DM went and did the bus and everything, what I was told by Dave himself, he said that you guys were all up there drinking away. Pat was a drunk, and that you guys, instead of studying, would be sitting around drinking. Do you know anything about that?
Well, that's what he did at night with the two tax people that. the attorney that you see in all those things, she was there as the tax person.
Oh, Monique Yingling?
Monique Yingling, yes.
You're kidding.
And you're
They would
saying,
stay up all night and drink. But to get to that point on us, yes, eventually I had people we'd go to study. We had classes and we did all that. But it deteriorated after a while. Again,
I have a question. So when the tax attorneys and DM and Norman came up there, did they live in the house? Did they live in Hubbard's house? Is that where they stayed?
Yeah. Yeah, they stayed in there. And Pat eventually moved into the house, the room that we were renovating for Hubbard.
Right.
That tells you a lot. Like that was his kind of like, his rep.
How tight were Pat and Annie?
Well, not in my mind. Again, just watching them together, they didn't really seem lovebirds. I mean, they didn't seem that way. They were cordial. I never saw them fight or anything, but he was always, they'd always kind of be in opposite places. You know what I mean? He would eat, and sometimes he would eat with us. Very rarely, if he was even there. But she was the one that kind of was always there too, like me, just trying to keep. I don't even know what she was doing. Oh, she was doing under Ray. Was getting some auditing. Was supposed to finish. I think she was in the middle of OT 1 or 2, one of those levels, which was what Ray told me. He was there trying to get her through that area that's considered a danger zone for.
Yeah, I thought she was had been on OT3 and the LRH had been case supervising her on that.
She had just started OT3 is what I was told by Ray. And yes, he had been doing those first ones with her, but when he departed, that's when he wanted Ray to get her through it.
Okay.
That's what I understood. That's why
and
Ray.
Sorry. I'm sorry. And then how did it all end for you there at the Creston Ranch? How did you end up back at Gold, doing the self-sufficiency? Yeah.
Well, again, there was about half of us, about 10 of us, like Jason and me and Susie and Herb and Mats Markowitz and Gelda and Mike Eldridge. We all went in an earlier thing. We were supposed to implement it and start it there. And Dave told me that when he had come up as part of that, I mean, all that was pretty civil. We just went back and we were working under him in the corporate liaison in charge. Again, it was Todd Alexander.
Right, it was Todd. Yeah.
Yeah. And I put together a program.
But what were you guys told as to why you were leaving Creston? What happened?
We weren't really told, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They were downsizing and things had changed. I remember something about the whole point we were there was this interim period for the will to make it through the attorneys and all that, and then do that. So somebody else may know, but we didn't get told any, we had no, reality factor, someone fill in the blank of vacuum of information. Other than I know they were saying that there was a change or things were about to be okay. So we didn't have to have everybody up there.
And then, of course, DM took over and got rid of Pat and Annie, and the rest is history from there.
Well, that was happening even near the end while we were up there. I remember getting a call from Mike Sutter saying, hey, I hadn't talked to Sutter for a long time, warning me that Jesse Prince and some people were coming up and don't let them in, just be aware that these guys are coming up there. I never saw them. Apparently they did.
Wait a minute. Mike Sutter said, don't let them in?
Yes, like it was danger. They're trying to take over. That's how Sutter put it.
Okay, but Sutter was working for VA and Jesse.
Oh, you're right. He said that, look, they're coming up there. And then the next call I got was from Bloomfield, the big Aussie gentleman.
Dave
Bloomberg.
Yeah, he was the one that told me that they were they're trying to take over. I think so.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do, Jim, with the L. Ron Hubbard, his research files, his auditing folders, because, I've read since then Marty's book and other books about how they got private investigators because they were trying to find out where Pat and Annie had them hidden. Okay.
Yeah, they were in the Avion trailer.
Yeah, and then when they found out where they were at, then they wanted to get them out. So the subterfuge was Pat and DM went to Washington, D.C. to work on tax stuff, and then they sent in the PIs and stuff to get it, because I got a phone call late at night, like 2 a.m. at the Gold Base from DM telling me, hey, Mark, Norman and Marty are going to be here with a truck, and you need to open up the LRH safe room, let them in, change the locks, and don't let anybody in. And he goes, I don't care if Pat Broeker, Annie Broeker, anybody says anything, just don't let them in. And that was when they got Hubbard's folders, which was supposedly the upper level OT levels. And that's how, and then once they had those, then they could go after Pat and kick him out. And then I don't know how they crushed Annie, but they did somehow.
Well, again, at that point, we were not, we were in our little circle. We were just doing cowboy stuff and taking care of the animals. So that was the only, I got those 2 calls. So that's all I knew. And then as I came back, I find out all this other, that's when I first find out about all this takeover stuff, and Spike was involved. And I mean, it's sort of like, oh my God, what the heck? So you know more about it than I do. I think I even remember.
No, but it's interesting from your point of view, because I've never talked to anybody who was up there at that time, I mean, I remember when you guys all came back, nobody ever talked about it. Jason worked for me for like 5 years, and he came back and he was in the RPF, and then, he was in gold. We never talked about it.
Yeah. My thought was that the actual takeover didn't happen for a year later, when the second group, including Annie, was to go to the RPF.
Yeah.
We set up all the RPF for these guys, because at that point, I'd finished self-sufficiency. It was now in estates. Sorry, I'm losing my voice.
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
Okay, great. Well, anyway, let's go.
Amy made a comment saying they sent Annie to the RPF because Amy was on the RPF with her.
Yeah. They sent Amy. I'm sorry, they sent Annie, and then all that second group. There was there's several others. I try to remember I remember the ones that I came back with, but I don't remember all the others.
Yeah, and then Annie was basically a kept person at the base to the day she died, from what I understand. I mean, Miscavige had something on her, because they would go off and talk when she was at the base and all that. He always was keeping an eye on her and all that. But she wasn't when I was there. I know I heard later she became an executive again, but she worked. She
became in charge of.
She worked with Ted Horner in the dark room when I was there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, she was later made in charge of the messenger unit for the base, the SU unit. Yeah, she was an interesting person. I mean, I think I told you about the bag of LRH's signed things, just like trash that I ended up giving to her.
Right.
4 bags of all his notes, that said everything he was trying to do up there, why we're painting fences white, the name of the ranch, and all this. So I recognized his handwriting from the mission I did with Jim Isaacson in 1984. Right. We went to DC. Which was the first originals mission to recover. We even found like 4 original tapes that nobody had seen the light of day. But so I knew I knew quite well his handwriting.
But you never found out who put all those devices in those bags, in the trash bags?
Annie blamed Sarge.
Oh, okay.
And she was really thankful. Well, and she's probably right, because I mean, I don't know how they organize things, but really it was just 2 people. Sarge was taking care of trash and shredding and all this, and it was in these other bags. There was like a bunch of bags, and that's what we were going. I just happened to open up them and look at it, because I wasn't going to just throw stuff away if I didn't know what it was. At least, just see what it was. And I found like 3 bags with notes, from him. But she was really appreciative of it. That's when she swore under her breath to Sarge. But I'd observed enough being there that Sarge was kind of doing a lot of the labor and pick up this and that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because before he went there, he was the one that was taking care of the horses and the stables.
He was doing everything, yeah.
Yeah, and he said LRH used to come and talk to him in the stables and visit the horses.
Oh,
yeah.
But and then poor Annie had to take care of Hubbard until he died. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was just her. Didn't she cook for him and took care of him and all that? I mean, it was just her and Sarge. That was it.
Yeah, I mean, she was okay. I don't want to give a bad impression of her there, because I was.
No, I loved Annie. Yeah.
He just went, but then I think she realized all this had been thrown in one stall like that, where you see all those horse stalls in the stables. It was all in one thing. It was all a lot of it was trash. It was whatever, and I think it just got mixed in. Yeah.
Okay, Janice, I'm going to go ahead and go to questions now. We got some questions.
And if we want to bring Amy on, Amy's available if we want to bring her on to chat with us.
I would like to, except let's get to the questions here first,
Okay.
and then we can, bring around. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. So I just
Okay.
go ahead and do that. I love Amy, and I'd love to have her on here. Anyway, we got a couple things. Okay, a couple things we got to acknowledge. We have couple new members. Joni Cummings, thank you very much for becoming a member. And then we have another member here, which is Eggert Snorri Olofsson. Thanks very much for becoming a member of our channel. We appreciate it. If anybody's interested in becoming a member, go to our homepage, click on that join button, follow the instructions on either a computer or laptop or Android phone. If you have an iPhone, you have to go through Google Chrome to go to YouTube, then go to our page and click on that join button. And we appreciate these new members. We also got a super sticker from Clearwater Chad. Thanks very much, Clearwater Chad. And I'm going to start going through these questions. Tori Christman's in the house. Jim, I bet Hubbard got tons of gifts. Can you tell us where they generally went? That was probably when you were in household unit. Yeah.
Yeah, he would get a lot. We would send photos of each one, and then we get requests, and certain ones would go to him. He would ask for them, and quite often, most of them, there'd be an indication of where they went. Now, some of them were in his handwriting. Some, I think, were from Annie. Just, put this in the library, put this in this place. And that was then what I was supposed to do, is to make sure that those things were done. I just couldn't figure out what car he wanted the Longhorns on. I think.
And I know on the ship, when he'd get all these gifts, a lot just went into storage.
Yes.
We had nowhere to put them.
Yeah, to answer your question, Tori, that's the other thing. We had like 5 containers, 40 foot by 10, with 8 by 10 by 40, 5 of them filled with things.
Yeah.
And then I heard after we left that, you got to collect money for David Miscavige's birthday gift. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, we used to do that for L. Ron Hubbard, but I don't ever remember doing that for DM. That was crazy. Anyway, next, we've got another member too, Danielle Chamberlain. Thank you so much. You're now a member, and we appreciate everything you and Neville do, Danielle. Thank you so much for that, for joining our channel. And we've got Tori Christman again. Jim, did they actually kick you out? I ask as now they lie and say that about anyone who leaves or escapes out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was on my way. Like I said, I was in the RPF for a while, and we were, I was trying to figure out how to get out, for the last part.
Were you part of that big exodus where they basically offloaded a bunch of people and gave them
it was kind of the first
$500?
Yeah, I was kind of the first wave of that.
That's crazy. I remember Neil Bogart, Neil Smed. That's how I met her, after she got out. She said, they moved everybody to LA. And then next thing you know, they were just kicking people out left and right.
Yeah. I think we were sort of the pilot for that test cases. Yeah. There was a group of us. Joe Canine, I think I mentioned, he was there, the former cameraman. And all these
a lot of old timers.
Didn't they get rid of Jeff Hawkins that way too?
Yeah. Jeff and I left at the same time.
Yeah, Jeff, the guy who got Dianetics on the New York Times bestseller list and sold millions of copies. Oh, yeah, we're just going to kick you out.
Yeah, he's doing the wrong thing.
All right, next question here. Vernon Salvatierra, question mark. Did Jim ever work with Mike Rinder?
Yes. Briefly. I mean, we were in the same area.
Yeah.
But he stayed with us in Virginia when he left for a few months.
That's right.
He stayed in our place for a while.
Yeah, that's right.
So
okay, great.
But I mean, I've known him. We're always really through Amy, because Amy worked in the same organizations that Rinder tended to. I would see him.
And Amy, Janice, Amy worked with you, and vice versa, right, Janice?
Yes. Yeah, Amy and I were very close. When she got married to Jim, that's why I was in the wedding.
Right.
I couldn't, when I saw those photos, I can't remember why I wouldn't have been at the wedding, because it was on the ship, and I probably was doing something else, because I always was at the base. I don't have no idea when that was. Pretty wild. Yeah.
It was in June of '87.
And that was after you returned from Creston, right? After you returned from the ranch, right? Yeah. Okay. And then this person, same question. Did you ever meet L. Ron Hubbard?
No, not face to face. I got a couple messages from him, written ones, but no, never did.
Yep. Okay, next question, Rosa Marie. Who is the biggest narcissist, DM or L. Ron Hubbard?
Well, having only met one of them, I would have to say DM. He sets a pretty high bar.
Janice has met them. Janice has met them both.
Say about the other. Who knows? I mean, you have to always clap at his photo all the time. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, Janice has met them both. So why don't you answer this?
Yeah,
I would give DM the award.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, I never met Hubbard either, but I mean, based on how I know he lived his life and all that when we were in the Sea Org, yeah, Miscavige is taking it to a crazy level. And that's not my dog. That's Jim's dog, right, Janice?
Right.
Mine are looking up. They're like, where's the dog?
Okay. Here we go here. Colleen's Reviews and Stories. Hey, everyone. Just got here getting ready to do some grilling for dinner in Michigan. I have a question. Is this the compound where Shelley is, meaning Creston? No, it's not.
Yeah, I don't
and they
know.
still have that ranch. I have no idea I think they're just maintaining it. I have no idea what they use it for.
Well, just like all the other homes that LRH used to live in, they bought those all up. What a waste of money. And I know Hubbard would agree with that.
Yeah.
You know, it's typical, though, when you mentioned DM and the lawyers were the ones drinking it up. Yeah, he always accused people of stuff like that. I remember that he said the same thing to me about Pat and Jason and everybody up there. We're all just being drunks all the time. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Well, I did confirm with JB, John Brousseau, that Pat was heavily drinking when he was at Newberry.
Well,
yeah, but he wasn't at Newberry. Yeah, he wasn't at Creston.
No, but he was drinking at Creston. In fact, I had woken up in the middle of the night to take him to the hospital with Annie and Mike Rinder, or not Mike Rinder, Mike Eldridge and Ray. I could smell the booze. What happened was apparently he fell and he hurt himself, and he was going into this tangent about OT3 information while I'm in the back and I'm the only non-OT there, you know, like, what's he talking about, you know? So he liked his whiskey.
Yeah. Okay, next question is here. So hold on. I lost my mouse. One sec here. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Next question is from Love for Kitchen. Every single episode of this channel is more fascinating than the last. Honestly, this is such a history lesson. No other channel is doing content like this. I'm absolutely engrossed in the stories. Well, thank you, Love for Kitchen. We appreciate you watching, and everybody else that is here. Next question is from Vernon again. Janice, did David Miscavige think Hubbard was mentally and physically ill towards the end of his life? I know the answer to that question. Yes, he did.
You go ahead, Mark.
No, he did. I mean, and it was true. I mean, we found this out after the fact, but Hubbard had several strokes, and Dr. Gene Denk was up there taking care of him at different times, and he was not in good health. You know, and I think that's one of the reasons why Miscavige moved and saw an opportunity to move and take over, because he knew that Hubbard was weak. And, you know, anyway, what are you saying, Janice and Jim?
Jim?
Well, he definitely looked overweight and not in good health. I know that.
Yeah.
You say he was overweight? Because I had heard, and I think it was Annie that told me, he'd actually, he couldn't eat a lot of food. So he ended up going on a diet of just apple juice.
Oh,
and
really?
From that, he actually shrunk down and was very small and petite in the later years.
Wow.
Okay. Next question here. Vernon's again. And Mark and Janice, did the hole exist when both of you were still Scientologists? No. That happened well after we were gone. Yeah, and we heard all that stuff when Amy got out, you know. I mean, that's when the first time I heard about the musical chairs and incident and all that other stuff, and it floored me. You know, I couldn't believe it. Next question. Peace Dog. Tori Chrisman, did you hang with Mark and Janice when you were in? Is that to...
That's to Jim.
It must be through Jim. Yeah, I mean, we knew each other. I mean, Jim and I worked together. We played basketball. I know that.
Yeah. And Janice, I did. You mentioned she was in, like, senior or whatever in that period, just when LRH departed. I was the head of the HU, and she was the deputy senior messenger, so she was all over the HU. Yeah. So that was probably the time I got to work with you the closest.
Yeah, I think so. Yep. Because I'd go up there every day and do inspections, and we'd chat and go over things.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, next question is for me, Vernon. Mark, what happened to your wife after you left? Did she get remarried? Is she still a Scientologist? Jim, you'd know better than me, but I heard that she got remarried to Peter Schless. Is that right?
Yes, I've heard that too.
Yeah.
But that's all I know. I don't. I mean,
Yeah, and she's still in.
That's a few years ago. So.
Yeah, but she's still in, and she's been, she's like Shelley Miscavige. She went to the ship when she was 12 or 13 or 14 or whatever, and that's all the life she ever knew. And they turned her against me. I mean, I came back twice after blowing, specifically because I didn't want to leave her, but they turned her against me like quickly. I mean, we've been together for almost 7 years, and and she didn't want to have anything to do with me anymore. So it was kind of like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to move on then. Thanks for that question. Here's one for Janice. What kind of vitamins do you sell in your business?
Oh, I sell pretty much the regular basic vitamins, A, D, B, C, all that kind of stuff. CalMag, Calm. You can go to www.fites.com and you can see it all there.
There it goes. It's on the bottom of the screen. And she's got Koala Calm. She's got Koala Calm, right, Janice?
Yes, I have Koala Calm.
Somebody came up with an idea yesterday for our logo to be a koala bear in a Hawaiian shirt, and we like that idea. All right, here, let's go. We got a few more questions here. In the wrong place. Here we go. Okay, this is from YouTube Watcher. Does Scientology management prefer any construction or architecture style? Jim?
Well, at the base, Hubbard had set a Scottish motif, which is where the white and the blue roofs come in, the slate type of thing. So that kind of set the style for that location. I can't speak to any other one.
No, it actually looked good. I liked the way it looked. I don't know about you, Jim. Had the stone veneer underneath and all that. The dark mahogany, dark wood. Yeah. Okay. Let's see what this is from Care Force JC. I drive by there for years, and it wasn't till I saw a stream from above did I realize how big the property is. All you saw was next to the road and all the derelict houses they finally tore down. That's the Gold Base. Were you there when they tore down the houses on No. Sublet Road, they bought the houses, but
I didn't know they bought everything down there. Really?
Yeah, they brought the several houses,
the
and then they put some people in there, and I think that's where the Headleys blew from. Yeah. But then they end up tearing them all down. All these perfectly good houses because DM didn't want them there.
Hey, that reminds me, Jim, were you involved in the golf course? When we redid the golf course, right?
Yeah, I hired the guy to do the design of it and built it.
Yeah, just so everybody knows that, that originally the Gilman Hot Springs had like 36-hole golf course, and then it all went to crap, and we had it. And the neighbors lived on this road called Sublet Road that lined the fairways, and they were all pissed off because they bought homes with a golf course and they were no longer there. So to handle the public relations problem after all these years, we built a 9-hole golf course down at their end of the property, and that's what I was asking Jim about.
Yeah, correct.
And I think it's still there.
Right. That's how we got approval to do the whole development of the base, was by putting that there.
Yeah, because the city council was upset that there was no golf course for the tent.
Riverside County, actually. Yeah, I actually presented to the Riverside County this whole marketing thing showing the golf course, and then also everything we were going to do. And that was sort of the ticket, because we had 5 members, and we weren't going to get it unless we did something that was considered good for the community, beyond what we were going to do with the highway, Caltrans, the highway that Dave hated because it kept him up all night later. Those are all part of the agreement.
Okay. Next question.
Amy says they tore down those houses because you could see into DM's office from there.
Oh,
that would make so much. That would be consistent for him to say that. I don't doubt it.
Yeah.
Also, Jim, did you build the tunnel under the road?
Yeah, we built.
Were you there for that?
Yeah, we built.
Yeah, I wasn't there. That was after we left. Yeah, that must have been a headache.
Yeah, it's actually pretty. Yeah, because we had to shut it down and we can go over it one at a time. But Caltrans has pretty good construction standards. We had 2-inch rebar, 8 and 10 inch spacings, and those footings, people can see them. They have stone on them now, but that's how big the footings are. I mean, those things aren't going anywhere. It's safe to go under there.
Yeah. Question: how much was the weekly salary for you all before you left?
For me, it was like most of the time.
Everything was $35 when I left. You know,
well, I was always on half pay or no pay, so that it was about $12.50. I was always on half pay for.
$17 always sticks in my mind.
Well, it was $17.20 when I first joined the Sea Org, and you got 2 dimes taped to the invoice with $17. It was the stupidest thing. The 20 cents, was ridiculous. Next question, Daniel Perry: is that where all the DVDs they sent me are recorded? The trailer things. Yeah, well, the DVDs and all that stuff was produced there at the Gold Property in the manufacturing building, right, Jim?
But he put that question up, I think, when we were talking about the castle.
Well, that's where they shot the movies.
Yeah, that's where they're. But you have all these other facilities. There's the film lab. There's an editing area. Like all those steps, you have the music, recording. There's all kinds of things that go into it.
Yeah,
in the castle
too.
I see Mitch Brisker on here.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Mitch. He said to say hello. You were close to Mitch? You knew Mitch?
Well, I was in a lot of movies, and I kept trying not to screw him up for him a lot, because I would do, I was in little things here and there, but yeah, and then late, I really liked him. That's a name I hadn't heard for a while. I hope he's.
Yeah, we did some interviews with him. He's great. And of course, they probably had to reshoot the movies because after you leave, they go, "Oh, we can't have Jim in there."
No.
Yeah, no, we did 2 or 3 interviews with him. You should watch on our channel. They're really good. Peace Dog says, so that's where Mark Headley spent his days working. He's talking about the castle. Yes, that is correct. And also the manufacturing, what we call Building 36. Mark Headley worked in there as well.
Right.
Next, I think these days they only make new films in LA. If I recall correctly, Mark told us that. Yeah, I don't know. I think Mitch.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. That new studio that they purchased down there.
Well, no, remember Mitch told us that broadcast center is where they do all the stuff for the TV channel, but that he said they're reshooting all the technical films again at the Gold Base. So who knows? Oh. Yeah, that's what's going on with that. And I answered that question about tunnel under the road. Here we go. This is from Vernon again. Did Dave Miscavige ever hit women in the Sea Org? I never saw him hit, but I heard stories about him making Larice do things to people.
Well,
did you ever see DM other than you said you saw me getting beat up? Did you see other acts of violence by DM?
Me? Heck yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you one. Like you meant to start with the women. Sarah.
Oh, he hit Sarah?
Okay, go ahead. He did. Go ahead.
He got in her face, and even her spittle was doing. Like I considered that a violent.
Yes.
Thing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, Sarah's like the sweetest, nicest person in the freaking world. You
can't get sweeter than Sarah.
I mean, but anyway, I was thinking about another again after Creston. Jason was with me, and he got audited up there by Gelda. So it's almost 2 years later. This is after the point when Dave's taken over, and it's actually in this place you call the Hole, right? Those trailers we put up when we were renovating for Qual, the auditing rooms. I'm sitting in the back, and Jason is up there. All the RTC people there. Dave puts a headlock on Jason and starts telling everybody how bad he is because he's giving up a confidential information from a session, because I remembered it because Gelda was auditing him, right? Like he had bad thoughts about Dave, or he's literally, it was like that, and I know you all, this isn't new to other people that you've heard, but I remember looking around the room going, is anybody else seeing this crap? Like this is completely 1000% wrong,
right.
The first time I ever saw DM do something like that was like probably 84 or something. And we were in his office and Eric Knudsen was in there with me and Jason. And Jason made some kind of comment. I don't know that Miscavige hated. He went across his desk and grabbed Jason around the throat. And Shelly and I both jumped up and said, Dave, stop. You know what I mean? It's like, you're going to stop something like that. That's not what we were there for, So after I got beat up and all that, I went, that's it for me. I mean, this is not the Scientology I was raised on,
You know what? And I'm sorry, I just noticed Amy said something about Dion putting his hands around her neck. And now when she says that, I kind of recall her telling me about that. That was, in fact, I think he had, she showed me the red mark, like the red.
Wow.
He's a freaking whack job, man.
Sociopath. Okay, next question
What's he
we have
doing
here.
now? Does anybody know that?
Hiding.
What he's doing?
Is he around? Like, is he still?
Well, the rumor is he's in Clearwater and he's basically avoiding service from the different lawsuits and stuff that are going on. But I don't know what he's doing,
Yeah.
But Mitch Brisker told us that he said he was never going back to the Gold Base. And when Mitch was there, he said Miscavige hadn't been back to the Gold Base since like 2013 or 2014, something like that.
Yeah, because Dave thinks they're all SPs up there.
Yeah, that's what Mitch
he
said.
would know, right?
Yeah, and obviously the indication hasn't worked because we all know who the true SP is.
Well, I remember you probably heard about this story, which is again kind of near the end. It's just a point after I finished my RPF, was back. It's like 2002 or 3. He has that tape called "Can We Ever Be Friends," which is designed as a tool. You already know about this story?
Yeah.
No,
go ahead. No, I know the tape.
We were all called to a muster, the entire base. At lunch, it was an hour before lunch, like 11 o'clock. And I forget who it was that got up there. Either Lisa Schroer or somebody, or it might have been Greg Wellhair, who was still kind of in it. A lot of these guys were in position, and they were no longer in position, and they were back. Anyway, he was the face. He says, he read a message from Dave saying, I'm sending this to all of you. You need to listen to this and take it to heart, because I really hope we can be friends. Something like that. In other words, the whole point being he's playing at the base as we're the suppressors on him. And I'm sitting there again. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I always look around, most of it, most of it were like, this is ridiculous. This is just.
Well, and Jim, just for our viewers out there, for people like Jim to be called a suppressive person, you saw all the buildings that he built, at Scientology, you know what I mean? He was a very trusted person. He did a lot of great things, you know what I mean? And this is supposedly a suppressive person. I mean, it's totally contrary. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, even itself, it's a wrong target. It's a wrong use of the tool. And it's a generality. It's self-suppressive to the entire base. You're playing this because we have to have some realization that we're the ones suppressing him.
Well, and to be honest with you, Jim, that was my final realization, was that he was not playing with the same rules that we were before when Hubbard was around. I went, he's not going to change. And then when we left, Janice and I and a bunch of us, we all got together here in Las Vegas. And when we first got out, we were still Scientologists. We all thought, well, we'll just wait till L. Ron Hubbard comes back, and then, he'll sort it out. We'll come back. And that's how much of a believer we were when we left. And then slowly but surely we peeled the onion, and then, we went, no, we're not doing that.
Well, when I was in Ray's office, I read this advice. It was like 6 pages in detail from him to Ray about It's called Organization of Your Unit, which was about how it was to take on, and he says, for a few years, you need to take on the bulk of maintaining the standardness of tech, and that was when he definitely was planning, somehow planning to come back, but
No, I know. Hey, we got a super chat question here from Anthony. Thank you so much, Anthony. How did the Sea Org react to Quentin's death, Janice?
Well, I didn't go around asking people. There was shock, definite shock and surprise that he did, that he committed suicide. And we are going to do a whole show on that. Yeah. So we'll save more information for later. Yeah.
Thanks, Anthony. Hey, by the way, we're going to be cutting off questions here in a minute because it's just going pretty late. So anyway, if you got a question, get in there now, Janice, and then at a certain point, let's stop starring these things. Okay?
We're going to have you back, Jim. This is too good.
I appreciate it. Because honestly, just between Sarah and I, we talk about these things once in a while. But, that's like an 18-year period of my life that helps straighten out my own, straight wire my own line. And remember things. Like I had forgotten about that thing with Amy. I just saw her note. I go, oh crap, I do remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's great. That's how we basically have healed ourselves, is talking amongst friends and people like you, Jim, who I haven't talked to in 33 years, but I remember we had great times. But then talking about, common things that happen, it makes you remember things and sort things out. Because, a lot of people weren't in the know as to what, the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. And then when they get the information, it helps to straighten things out.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a question here. Meg B, a member of our channel. Thank you very much, Meg. I wonder what Annie and Pat thought about LRH and how sick he got. I can't imagine the cognitive dissonance that would require. Did Danny ever talk about that at all when you were there, Jim?
Well, to me, she always seemed sad, a little sad, and a little bit introverted, And I think that's when Ray told me that he was trying to get her through this non-interference zone, that particular period of those auditing sessions or whatever. But she seemed sad, I mean, she always had, she'd give me some anecdotes here and there about him, but I could tell she seemed, to respect him and care for him for sure.
But you got to realize that for 6 years, he was the only company she really had.
Yeah, that's a whole crazy thing.
Yeah, because there was Pat, who gets kicked out, and he's only there, sneaks in at nighttime so that Hubbard wouldn't know he was there. And then you got Sarge, who's mostly working with the animals, but Sarge was there. He was the only terminal Annie had. And I remember even Sarge saying to me, he said, oh, yeah, Annie used to get so pissed off at Hubbard. She would come storming in from the trailer and just throw stuff around. And I am so sick of that old man.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, think about it from her position. You're a young woman. She, and your life is being dictated in a very personal way.
Yes.
I can't even imagine.
Janice, I'm sure you felt like you dodged a big one when Pat and Annie were the ones chosen at X when Hubbard took off, right?
Oh yeah, I was happy. I wanted a life.
Thanks very much for that question. Next question here, we got Joni Cummings. Statement: do you three realize how happy I see these three beautiful souls Scientology could not crush? Question: do you think that people from other cults are being helped by telling your stories? Hey, thanks very much for that nice comment, Joni. Do you think that people from other cults are being helped by telling your stories? Janice, why don't you answer that?
Yes, I actually have a friend who grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and she left, and her parents are still in, and she watches my show, and it helps her. She sees that there is hope and that there's other people in the same boat as her.
Okay, thanks very much for that question. Here's a question from Moonage Daydream. Question: were doubts ever raised about the legality of L. Ron Hubbard's will? Also, did an independent executor oversee the dispersal of his estate, or did he appoint someone on staff to do it? He appointed Norman Starkey was appointed. Whether Hubbard did it or not, that was a question. I think it was litigated. Lori Wallersheim had a lawsuit, and basically I think he had some family members or whatever challenging whether or not L. Ron Hubbard actually signed his will.
Nibs was challenging it.
Yeah, L. Ron Hubbard Jr. was challenging it, and the courts said that he did sign it. But anyway, how about you, Jim? Did you ever hear anything about that?
Just from what Norman told me, and it made some sense, is that he was selected. He actually told me, I remember the first thing, because this is all new, it's all happening. He passes away. A week later, whenever you were told, get these guys and send them, then we're at ASI for a couple of days, and we're just getting quickly crash trained on what our responsibility is to be, which then, of course, gets canceled the moment I meet Annie.
Yeah.
But he was surprised. He didn't think he would be it. He thought it would probably be Dave or Annie.
Right.
Well, the will before that one, the final one that he signed, the will before that, Pat Broeker was the trustee of the estate. And I was wondering, why was Pat removed from that and Norman put on it when Pat was the loyal officer? Well, then I later find out that Pat had been kicked out of Creston, was in bad with Hubbard when he died. So, of course, it made sense to me that it wasn't Pat.
Yeah, he wanted Ray to check him.
Right.
And
Well,
how
he'd
about, did you
already
ever hear?
ordered.
And he wouldn't show up.
Yeah.
Well, and then he had already ordered David Mayo to sex check Miscavige, and then the worksheets never got, no, Jesse Prince.
Yeah.
And then David Mayo was to do Pat, right?
Right. David Mayo did sec check Pat, and Jesse Prince sec checked DM. And the reports on that never got to Hubbard because they were removed from the mailbox by the two people who did the courier runs, Dave and Pat.
Right.
And that was told to me by Sarge.
Yeah.
I don't doubt it. Because I can tell you, Norman's reaction was he was sort of like, he didn't know what to do. You know, he was just learning it. He's just, you know, he made some sort of quip. Yeah, you and me both, or something like that about what are we supposed to do with this, you know?
Hey, Jim, from your end of things, did you ever hear anything about the loyal officer issue and all that sort of thing? Because it was out and then it was pulled back.
Only what Dave himself showed me when I came back. He spent about an hour with me showing me in the period that we were up there, a year and a half, other HCOBs and PLs had come out. And he was showing me the ones that showed what Hubbard himself wrote. And then he was showing these kind of bold parts of the very same ones, which he said, Pat added. Okay. He's told me that the loyal officer thing was just, there's nothing, you know, we can't find anything from Hubbard saying to do that. So this is really, you know, again, this is like the first time I'm back kind of seeing Dave on the base. Yeah. So I'm like, okay. And he was very open and very kind and just kind of showing me these things. And it made some sense because I would even read these even when they came out. And I think others will have a similar thing. They just didn't ring right, some of them, you know, like a lot of wordy things that weren't really adding any understanding to anything. You know? Well,
you know, the crazy thing that I remember thinking at the time, and to this day, I still think was out of character of Hubbard, is he promoted himself to admiral, yet he was dead. You know what I mean? It's like, and he retired the term Commodore, and he promoted himself to admiral when he died.
That's what I'm saying.
It made no sense to me.
Yeah, Pat had like a whole other thing going on there. You know what I mean? You need crystals and pyramid power and stuff. I'm just saying. He could be a very nice man. Don't get me wrong, you know, but he would go somewhere, you know.
Yeah, my sister told me a story where she and Dave had to meet Pat at a bar, and they go in.
Of course.
And Pat's at the bar. He's been drinking, and they come up to him, and he's like, "Wait, I'm in session." And then he sits there, and then finally goes, "Okay, what is it?"
Yeah, I'll never forget the free association he did in the back of the van when we were taking him to the hospital because he collapsed. You know, he got waking up in the middle of the night smelling whiskey. He just went into something about the counterattack on Earth and stuff. And I'm looking around at Ray and the other people I knew who know tech. I'm like, and Ray just gives me one of these, like I knew it was bullshit, you know, just from Ray's little, because, you know, I had worked with Ray as his org officer and I trusted him on particularly something technical. He could go in and telling you, you know, the counterattack against Earth. He's sitting there. Anyway.
Yeah.
No, I same way. I mean, that was the way it was explained to me by Miscavige, that it made sense to get rid of Pat because he was on another planet, right? Yeah. But how about Annie? Because I never really had any interactions with him. You said she looked sad and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But, you know, Janice, was she strong enough to be able to, if she had been in charge?
No. You got to remember, she's gone for 6 years, and she's only with one or two people in all those 6 years, and you want her to come back now and suddenly take over the running of an international organization? She couldn't do it.
Yeah, Pat controlled her completely. I can tell you that. In that year and a half when I was seeing them together, she would just do whatever he said.
Yeah.
Right, which doesn't make sense since she was the one left in charge and he was the one kicked out, but she was subservient to Pat.
Well, again, and that's where Ray had told me that she wasn't in a good place. I told him about he was trying to get her through that auditing. He said that somehow she started getting sec checked or something, and he thought it was Pat. Like was trying to just, you know, like in the middle of the OT level, you know, whatever. And I don't know anything about any of those, you know what I mean? I'm just saying that, you know, I could tell like she wasn't in a strong mental state, put it that way. When Pat was gone, she'd be great. You know, we take care of the horses. She was very good communication, high affinity. She had all those qualities. When Pat was there, she would kind of just not say anything,
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, next question. We got a super chat. Anon A, thank you so much for that super chat. What was Hubbard's mental state the last years? He was by himself, and he was not doing well from what we were told, and, he'd had strokes, and Sarge told stories about Hubbard being very, afraid and skittish and that type of thing. Right, Janice?
Yeah, and he was having headaches because Sarge said when he was witnessing the sign of the will, Hubbard was like yelling, just get it done. Where do I sign? I need to go lie down.
Right.